So as we record this podcast, you guys are just about to release your third album, which is called Succession. Given the difficulty with you guys living in different parts of the world, what was the impetus for recording this album? What eventually brought you guys back together?
It's kind of been this conversation between me and the guy I mentioned, Snorri, that's been running over years. That we talked about how we really wanted to get back on track and do this third album. And him and the other guitar player they'd been writing songs steadily. I'd been writing lyrics, and I had several ideas stored up for this. And I just remember they'd done some demos for a couple of songs that they'd been working on that I just thought sounded amazing, and it kind of lit the fire again, I guess. And then we just found out that okay, let's really try to do this now, and just sort of instead of just talking about doing it. And so we kind of just started going through the songs, the material that we had, and started talking about concepts for the album, ideas for the lyrics and artwork and everything. And then we just set a date. Like they started recording instruments, and then I tried to get. I was traveling to Europe with my other band, with Beaten to Death, and just decided to try and kind of schedule the recording sessions to that period, so I could just go straight from the show when I finished doing shows to Lithuania to work on the album.
Tell me a little bit about your songwriting process, how you guys usually put songs together, and if that process has changed at all since your last album.
Well, the process has definitely changed. Like over the course of the whole career of the band. When the band started out, yes, I was the main songwriter, and most of the material was worked out in the rehearsal space with the whole band. And that just gradually changed when we kind of ended up not being in the same country at the same time. So, and then I back in the days when we started the band, I used to play guitar, but I stepped down from the guitar duties after several years. And then I also kind of started writing less and less, and the other guys started writing more and more. So like now, I guess most of the songwriting is done but separately. Like they work on the songs separately, and then the guys meet up in the studio and kind of do some demos, and then take it from there. So it's definitely changed over the years. Like the second album we did, 2008 album, was kind of a combination of the kind of different writing styles, where some of the stuff was written together with the whole band, and some of it, or actually a lot of it, was written basically at home. Yeah.
With the change in writing process, how do you compare the songs on Succession to the songs on the previous album, The City Speaks in Tongues?
I think I would say that the songs now are slightly more mature and focused. Like I think The City Speaks in Tongues is a really good album, fairly intense album, but you can kind of hear that at times we kind of tried to do a lot of stuff in the same songs. And I mean, we still kind of do that, but I think we've also kind of taken a step back and decided to give the music a bit of space that we maybe didn't do back in the days. This is something I think changed with that EP, which was basically one song recorded, one song that is about 25 minutes long, where we tried out, just giving, we tried out to give music some breathing space. And then on this album, we kind of got back to shorter and more intense songs, but still we wanted to keep that kind of, a feel of, being intense, but not stressing the music. So I'm extremely satisfied with the results.
You mentioned Snorri has his recording studio in Lithuania, which I believe is called, I'm going to get this wrong, so feel free to correct me. But I'm gonna try to say Ymir Audio. Is that close?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Ymir Audio. Yeah, Ymir Audio. Yeah.
And this is Snorri's own studio. Mm-hmm. Is this the first time that you worked with Snorri as an engineer and as a producer?
Yeah, I guess he co-produced the EP in 2009, but he wasn't engineering it himself. So this is the first, but kind of the whole process of our previous albums before that EP as well was kind of what made Snorri set out on becoming a producer. Like that's where his interest started, I guess. And this is the first time that we've done everything ourselves, where he's kind of just taken the lead on everything, and where he takes care of engineering and producing and everything, mastering everything. And I think interestingly enough, this is also the first like proper metal album that's been recorded in his studio, like extreme metal album. So he's also kind of been gearing up to do this She Said Destroy thing, that he really wanted it to be a very good end product.
I'm curious, what kind of band does he usually record?
All sorts of genres, like from like super commercial pop to country to punk to all sorts of stuff. I have an impression that his studio is fairly popular in the region. Like he's made a name for himself in Lithuania and the neighboring countries, as far as I can see.
Is Lithuanian country music something I should be aware of? Is that going to be the next Norwegian black metal?
Well, it might be. I have to say I am. Even though the rest of the band actually live there, I have not listened that much to Lithuanian music, I'm sorry to say.
Why Lithuania? I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but
Snorri lived in the UK back in the days, and he met his girlfriend there, and she's from Lithuania. She's an artist from Lithuania, and they went to school, to music school in the UK, and they basically decided to move back to Lithuania. And after a while, when we stopped playing live, Bjorn, the other guitar player, also decided to move down there to kind of work with Snorri as the producer. So they're just
Let's talk about the recording just a little bit. So you guys actually went to Ymir, to Snorri's studio just before the pandemic hit, right?
Yeah, it was recorded. When was I there? I think it was like in the middle of February 2020. And I remember flying back, and I started to see people wearing face masks. It was, then the whole lockdown was only a couple of weeks away. I think I got back to Norway at the very end of February. So it was only, So it was pure luck that we actually decided in that timing. If we got delayed and we decided to do it later in 2020, this album wouldn't have happened yet. So, or we would have to find a different solution to it. So that was a lucky break.
Were you guys able to get all your tracking in before the lockdown?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything was done. But the other guys had already finished the drum tracking and everything before I got there. So while I was there, we were focusing on vocals and just kind of talking about the ideas and stuff for the album. And we worked extremely efficiently. So all the vocals were done in a matter of days. Yeah, so everything got done in time, which was very lucky.
Now, having a band member who was also the engineer and operating the studio, did that make it easier to get your ideas, to record the songs the way that you wanted them to sound?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always a danger that you kind of when you kind of have your own studio and the engineer plays in the band, I guess you can fall in this kind of trap where you never finish working on the product. like nobody tells you to kind of step back and let it kind of live on. But I think it's like from our experience now, I would say that it's worked out very well. Like it's easy to kind of decide on trying to change things up, and then they will just go into the studio and do it quickly in between their normal work days. So it's yeah. So I'm very happy with it, and it's much easier as well to not actually involve other people. Like it's I think it's a very comfortable way to work.
Now, did Snorri also mix and master the album?
Yes, he did. We were talking about sending it out to someone else for mastering, but in the end, we were very happy with. Well, he wanted to try and do it himself first, and then we were happy with what it sounded like.
So we talked about the difference in music, the way your sound has evolved from your previous album to Succession. In terms of the sound of the album, how would you describe the sound in comparison to your previous work?
Well, are you talking about the songwriting or kind of
just the production?
Sound? The production, yeah.
I mean, it sounds very immediate. It's very in your face.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very in your face. But actually, what was done with this album is quite interesting because, I mean, the songs are, a lot of the songs are quite different from each other. Like they kind of have a basis in different styles of music almost. Some are more kind of based around black metal, and some are more kind of based around hardcore or like more technical, like thrash and death metal. And what was done is that we changed up the whole setting, like the whole setup of the drums, for example, were changed depending on the sound of the song. Like if it was a slow and heavy song, we changed up the drums. Like we used a much bigger kick drum, for example. I think we used about 6 or 7 different snare drums for the album. And also like the amplification on the guitars was changed around a lot. And then we kind of just decided to, like, in the mix, you kind of try to make it sound more like a whole unit, but we kind of focused on making each song its own thing. So, and the idea was also to, like, Snorri had this thought that he works digitally, but he's also very much into a lot of what you get from analog sound, like the warmth you can get from analog sound. So the idea was that we try to have some constraints on how the recording was done, where we didn't want to cut up the drums too much. For example, the songs are kind of glued together from maybe 2 or 3 different takes. So it's not that much cut and paste. And all the effects on the guitars are from pedals instead of just applications in a studio program or plugins or whatever you call them. I'm not an engineer, so I'm kind of not that good on the language.
Yeah. I think people know what you're talking about. Like the in-program mods or simulators or whatever you call them.
Yeah. So it was the idea was kind of to not do anything that wasn't possible before, I don't know, like early 90s or something, to kind of, to kind of keep the music as alive as possible. So we use a lot of room sounds to kind of get the right sound of the drums and the vocals. We used a lot of room mics to kind of take advantage of the room instead of just using like a plugin for reverb or whatever,
In terms of switching around the instruments and the amps to give each song a different feel or a slightly different sound, is there a reason you wanted each song to stand apart from the rest?
Yeah, I think we kind of felt that when we'd worked in the studio before, we were limited by time and money. And then you just decide, and it's very typical for metal bands that, you often have scarce resources and you can't really play around. Everyone isn't Metallica. You can't just play around forever, and you kind of have to decide on the sound, and then you stick to that for each and every song. Even though, I mean, for many bands, that the sound they kind of decide upon doesn't necessarily fit to all of their songs. And Snorri and I was actually talking about this beforehand where we kind of made comparisons to a lot of bigger pop albums. Or if you listen to something like, I don't know, if you listen to something like Beyonce, for example, you'll hear that the production kind of changes around between the songs, and also the styles of the music changes changes in each song. And so it's a quite normal way to work in pop music, for example, but it kind of seems to us that it's not that normal to do it with metal. And we really wanted to try that out to kind of say, okay, let's do the best we can with each song here and try to give them the sound they deserve. Because since it was done in Snorri's studio, we're not that limited by time. So that gave us a lot of freedom to actually do this, to spend the time that was needed to record or to find the sounds. Yeah.
I mean, I think the truth is the reason why most metal bands don't do that is because they walk into the studio saying, we want to sound exactly like Left Hand Path.
Yeah, of course.
Rain and Blood or Transylvanian Hunger or whatever.
Well, I kind of get that as well. I mean, the whole thought was kind of new to me also. That it's like before I discussed this with Snorri, before we recorded, I hadn't really thought of that in those terms. Like I would also probably have just used like I was used to doing back in the days. So we used to have one reference for, well, not necessarily for the whole sound, but maybe you have a reference for snare sound and you have a reference for guitar sound. Like you said, like you want it to sound like Left Hand Path or something like that. You want that Sunlight Studios kind of guitar. And I don't think I'd really thought about it before we kind of decided on doing this, and I think it turned out really well. Like for a while, I remember I was concerned about whether it would make the album sound uneven, but through the mixing process and everything made it sound like kind of one thing. Although you can still hear that the songs are different in style, but they kind of belong together still, I think.